Well, it certainly has been a rough week in the air after two severe turbulence events over the U.S. that resulted in injuries, hospitalizations, and unfortunately one death. But this current stretch shouldn't come as a surprise necessarily. Last year, the FAA released data on 146 serious injuries related to severe turbulence from 2009 to 2021.
For more on why this trend seems to be increasing, let's bring in Dr. Paul Williams, professor of atmospheric science at the University of Reading in the United Kingdom. We'll start with these clear air turbulence events. Can you explain what that is and maybe what height of the atmosphere it might be more or less likely?
Well, the clue is in the name, is clear air turbulence, so that means it's invisible, and we use that label to distinguish it from the other kinds of turbulence, like flying through a storm or near a storm, or over a mountain range. All of these factors can cause turbulence, but clear air turbulence is generated in the jet stream, nothing to do with weather systems. You can be flying through clear blue skies at 35 or 40,000 feet typically, and just you hit this wall of turbulence, and there's no sign, no indication, no forewarning. The radar, even in the onboard radar, can't even pick up this kind of turbulence. So it's particularly hazardous to air travelers.
So what can airlines do? What can pilots do to help guard against something like this? Is there anything that they can do?
Well, we have these forecasts of turbulence, specialized forecasts for the aviation sector, a lot like the regular weather forecasts that you show, but instead of forecasting temperatures and precipitation, it's forecasting the severity of the turbulence at flight cruising levels. They're about 75 or 80% accurate, but we could certainly do with improving those forecasts. And in fact, I'm devoting my career to trying to make those forecasts as good as possible so that pilots have perfect information, or as perfect as we can get it, of where the turbulence will be. And in terms of just what passengers can do, the obvious thing really is just to keep your seatbelt fastened. That's virtually a guarantee of safety. I've heard of one story where in the middle of a turbulence encounter, an overhead luggage bin popped open because of the strength of the turbulence, and luggage can fall out and hit people, but that's exceedingly rare. If the seatbelt is fastened, you're virtually guaranteed to be safe.
A lot of people are nervous flyers, me included. So I appreciate your hopefully perfect turbulence forecast. But from what I understand, this is much more of a hazard to people inside the plane than the plane itself, correct?
Correct. So we know that about 5,000 aircraft annually encounter turbulence over the USA that's strong enough to lift you out of your seat if you're not seatbelted. Very, very rarely there can be damage to an aircraft. So there's a classic example that has been studied by academics of a plane that was flying through really severe, extreme turbulence, and one of the engines broke off in midair and fell to the ground. So that sort of thing can happen. It's really very rare, and it's almost certainly not going to happen to any kind of flight that you're on in future.
Dr. Williams, last week in the U.S., we had a large-scale synoptic system, big low-pressure system. We were setting pressure records, right? And so we had a large-scale wind event. If planes were avoiding something like a thunderstorm but still flying through one of these large-scale wind events, does that up the chances of encountering turbulence?
It absolutely does, and it's exactly those strong winds which tend to have a lot of wind shear in them, which is what generates this invisible clear air turbulence. So yeah, just because you're away from storms is not a guarantee that you're going to have a smooth ride. There's still a lot of turbulence. There's about 3 times more clear air turbulence in the jet stream just because of those strong winds and the deformation and the wind shear than in the other parts of the atmosphere.
Speaking of those low pressure records, we've seen instances that research is showing us storms are getting stronger or changing climate. Is that affecting the amount of turbulence incidents that we're seeing?
I think it is. We've built up a lot of scientific knowledge now on what climate change is doing to turbulence, and it's bad news for nervous flyers. It's increasing it. The jet stream is already 15% more sheared than it was when satellites first began observing it in the 1970s. And because it's that wind shear that generates clear air turbulence, I think we are seeing more of it, and we will see more of it in future as well. Our computer simulations suggest there could be 2 or 3 times as much severe clear air turbulence on busy flight routes in the coming decades because of climate change.
Well, Dr. Paul Williams, Professor, Atmospheric Science, University of Reading in UK, we appreciate your time. Thank you for the insight.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You know, one thing he mentioned is that you'll encounter more of that turbulence in the jet stream as well, right? But if you think about a lot of the flights in this country and around the world, a lot of times we'll catch a ride on the jet stream because it increases your fuel efficiency, gets you to your destination faster, but also is the area where you will most likely encounter turbulence.
Right. That's a problem for me.
How do you weigh the pros and cons of that?
Yeah, no, it is, because now, and that's something that obviously Professor Williams and the flight companies are going to have to work on. But I'd like to know a little bit more about that other flight. I wanted to be like, now, Paul, let's talk about that.
The one where the engine came off?
I didn't know about that.
I didn't either. But like you said, extraordinarily rare occurrence. So best thing you can do, keep that seatbelt fastened your entire flight. We hope you can stick around. Weather Underground will be right back.